So let me grab the link and I'll post it in the Slack, and then we could start.
Cool.
Give everybody a second to get in here also.
Cool.
All right. Well, this is weird because, okay, there we go. I was getting the link on YouTube, so like I was watching us while I was grabbing the link. All right. Posting it to Slack. Now we'll give like a minute for everybody to come in. All right, is anybody here yet? 2 viewers, but I think that's just me and you. If I remember how it works. So we've got 3. So 1 person's watching now.
John on.
Let's see. We've got still 3. And all right, we've got a couple more people now. So let's start talking about the slate. We have, 6 games tonight.
Mm-hmm.
No weather concerns, unlike the early slate where it looked like every game was going to get rained out, and then a couple of them played and a couple got rained out. It wasn't like when I first looked at this slate for this afternoon, I thought there was going to be 5 of the 8 games rained out. So it wasn't quite that extreme, but there were some cancellations. So I think that the pricing's a little tough for this slate. So I think we have to adjust our expectations a little bit for what we're expecting the pitchers to score, like points per dollar wise. But right at the top, Jameson Taillon, Josh, is $12,000 pitching in Miami, so a plus matchup. Do you think that's too much to pay for him, or do you like Taillon as a play for the slate?
Under normal circumstances, and normal circumstances being a bigger slate, I guess, more options, better options, I would probably steer clear and think that that's a little bit of a hefty price tag. But look, the guy's been phenomenal this year, and on a smaller, little bit of an uglier slate like this, I'll probably have a little bit more exposure to him than I normally would. That being said, I definitely don't think Miami is a pushover matchup as sometimes they're painted to be by myself even at times. But I've learned the hard way.
What do you expect from Miami this season?
Oh, I mean, I think they're a pretty bad team, but I just don't think they're going to go. I don't think they're an offense like, well, I was going to say the Padres, but they've gotten significantly better in the last half of a season, I guess, from the All-Star break on last year. But they're not a particularly they're not an offense that's ever going to scare me, but they're not someone that I'm just automatically like, oh yeah, that's a good source of Ks right there, and I'm throwing any pitcher in there who's facing them, no matter anyone who's good. So again, that being said, if it was more options available, I would probably have just like 20% of Taillon, but given the slate, I would probably say it's closer to 50 to 60% tonight.
So it's funny because I kind of feel the opposite with you, where I think Taillon's very good, but the only reason I would roster him at this price is because of the matchup. The Miami, the Marlins this year, they're so far 20. Where were they? I just added here. They're 25th in the league in WRC plus against right-handed pitching. They're striking out a ton, 24.3% strikeout rate. So the only reason I would look to roster Taillon is because I think Miami is really terrible. I think they're probably going to be the easiest matchup for any pitcher this season. So I guess what is just kind of curious because we don't have that many games to talk about. What do you think is going to be the easiest matchup for pitchers this year?
Good question. Let me pull. Probably, I think Miami's top 2 for sure. Top, I believe, yeah.
Okay. Well, top 2, that's a pretty favorable matchup.
AP is up there, but I think it's a little easier for.
What team did you say?
Kansas City.
Kansas City, I would agree. Kansas City. Tampa Bay is also a very shitty offense.
That's probably it. That's probably the only people I'd even bring up.
The one reason that I would put the Marlins ahead of the Royals as an easier matchup, at least for DFS purposes, is just because the Royals don't really strike out a ton. So I think that the extra strikeouts from the Marlins are going to make them an easier matchup for pitchers. I don't think that they're going to have like the highest strikeout rate or anything like that in baseball. I just think that they're going to struggle to get on base. They're not going to score a lot of runs this year. So I would expect them to have that 30 number next to the pitcher matchup on DraftKings by the time the season's over in terms of ease of matchup.
Ease ranking.
So for Taillon,
tonight we agree though, absolutely. Miami's the matchup to target, clearly, for pitching purposes.
So I wouldn't go out of my way to target Taillon. Like I wouldn't force him into lineups, but if you're using a cheap offense and you have the money to spend up for him, I think it makes sense. I don't think he's a bad play by any means. I do like for his price, Rich Hill better than Taillon.
Yeah, I would agree with that tonight.
So I have a little bit of reservation about rostering any Dodgers pitcher ever just because of pitch count concerns. The Dodgers aren't letting their starters work very deep into games. They go to their bullpen a lot earlier than most other teams do. Just if I'm looking at Rich Hill at 9,700 versus Taillon at 12,000, I think that there's more upside in Rich Hill's price because Taillon still needs 24 fantasy points to pay off his salary. Rich Hill only needs about 18 and a half or 19 fantasy points. So if we're looking at Rich Hill, he struck out more than a hitter per inning last year. The Arizona Diamondbacks overall were a pretty good offense against lefties last year, except they don't have JD Martinez this year. They also had really significant home road splits. They're not as good of an offense on the road. And I think that Rich Hill at 9,700 is the guy to pay up for. I wouldn't leave $2,000 of salary on the table if I had it to go up to Taillon, but just factoring in price, I think that Rich Hill is the better target than Taillon. So what do you think of Hill for tonight's slate?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's the only over-under tonight that's smaller than the Miami-Pittsburgh game, so lower than the Miami game. So, and look, he's the favorite. As you mentioned, the Diamondbacks have tried very significant home road splits. JD Martinez gone. It's one of the best hitters in the whole league against left-handed pitching. So, yeah, I mean, I think you said it pretty well. If I have the cash at the end of the lineup to go up to Taillon, I probably will because I think he's a little safer of an option and he's got more higher of an upside in terms of going deeper into the game. Guy's coming off of a complete game shutout, right?
Taillon did pitch a shutout in his last start.
I think so. So but I do think for his price, Rich Hill's the guy tonight. And I personally would like to stack a lot of Seattle and Oakland, and I think that's the highest expected output tonight with the shittiest pitchers. So in order to do that, it'll be a little bit easier to take the big bats that I like with Hill over Taillon. Excuse me.
Okay, so in terms of secondary pitching options that are at a cheaper price tag, who are you looking at?
Well, I know we both are definitely fans of Garrett Richards. He's someone we've been talking about all season. His price is not quite – it's getting closer. It's creeping up to what it should be, but given the matchup too, KC is a big pitcher's park, correct, right? I believe so.
Yes, that's a favorable pitcher's park.
Yeah, so he's in a nice favorable matchup, a nice favorable park. His price isn't quite at what I think it should be. As you mentioned before, Kansas City doesn't quite strike out as much as we'd hope. But I think Garrett Richards is definitely a safe secondary option tonight. And I don't know how much Matt Harvey I'll be playing, but I think he is also worth mentioning.
I think Harvey is such garbage.
Yeah, I mean, look, I haven't watched him pitch that much this year personally, so tonight's going to be one of those nights where I actually watch the game and see what his stuff looks like. I don't think it's going to be too impressive, but I guess it's more valid. I don't want to spit out 10 guys here, but Taijuan Walker, he's always been a wild card for me. I believe he's a top prospect. He was a very high prospect, years ago now at this point. He's not that old, but he's not that young either. For the Mariners, I think, was where he came up. And, this guy's got electric stuff, but, he's been prone to, leaving some pitches over the middle of the plate and getting, taken deep, chasing him out of starts early in the past. So, look, the over-under in the Dodger game, I mentioned is 7 before. And, Rich Hill isn't the most dominant guy in the world where it's just such a lock that, the runs are going to be scored from the Dodger side and there's no chance that that's from, a Diamondback win. So I think Taijuan Walker is definitely worth the GPP play tonight I think he gets Ks too. I don't have the stats in front of me. I'm pulling it up on Fangraphs, but
okay. So for me, in this price range, Garrett Richards is by far my favorite play.
Agreed. We agree. Yeah.
He's a top of the rotation pitcher. He hasn't pitched great to start the year from just in terms of actual real life baseball. He's a 5.71 FIP, but from a DFS perspective, he's still very cheap. He's striking out 11.5 guys per 9 innings. The walk rate is also up, but he's had a couple of big GPP performances start the year. And the reality is that he is somebody who should be priced in like the 9,000 range or so. So Richard at 7,100 in a favorable matchup. I think that he's a really good play. Really, the only 3 pitchers I like on this slate are Tyone, Rich Hill, and Garrett Richards, with my favorite combination being Rich Hill and Garrett Richards. So if I'm laying out like what I think my exposure would be, it would probably be Garrett Richards in all of my lineups, and then Rich Hill in probably like 60 to 70%, and then Tyone wherever he fits with the rest of the salary. So in terms of those guys you threw out, what's your priority on rostering them?
I'm going to go Rich Hill and Tyone, probably about equal exposure, I would say. I don't know. I'll have a little bit more Rich Hill, but we agree completely. You know what? I'll probably have the most Garrett Richards than anything else. Probably have about 60, 70% Garrett Richards, 50, 40% Hill, and 30, something around there for Tyone. But I do think Taijuan Walker, look, the guy had 8.5 Ks per 9 innings last season, which is obviously a little bit more of a sample size than he's done this year. And I do remember him as a pretty electric prospect. So I think he'll be in about 5 or 10% of my lineups. But for the most part, my favorite combination as well will be Rich Hill and Garrett Richards.
All right, so let's move forward into the offenses. You kind of touched on it for a second there. You said that you liked Richards. Matt says Richards combo. That's where I'm leading.
Richards. That's not what I said.
Rich Hill, Garrett Richards. I might have said it. I don't know. I can't.
Oh.
Yeah, everything. All right, but yeah, Richards, Rich Hill. Only people with Rich in their name, basically. So moving to the offenses, you said that you really liked the Seattle Mariners. And
sorry to interrupt. I just don't agree. Do you really think Harvey's the worst pitcher on the slate outside of Derek Holland?
So if we bring up Harvey's numbers from last year.
I'm not talking about last year. He was still recovering.
Yeah, well, his velocity's down farther this year than it was last year. So
Milwaukee strikes out a lot, though. It's a matchup,
Yeah, but he doesn't strike anybody out, though.
All right, we'll see. Oh, want to make a little lunch bet? He gets over 4 Ks tonight?
No, 4 Ks is an extremely low. Like, if you roster him and he gets 4 Ks, that's a bad DFS play.
No, I'm not rostering him. I just think it's such a small slate, and I wouldn't be shocked if Harvey hits value tonight. That's all I'm saying.
Well, you said you were rostering him before, so all right. So
that was before we talked about Richards. No, we already knew. Get the fuck out. Sorry, that was like the first. Wasn't going through the list. I'm definitely not rostering him. I hate the Mets, but yeah, I mean Harvey's the velocity being down even more than last year is. I think I've mentioned earlier that I haven't quite watched him specifically this year, but that I was meaning to tonight. So I would have known that in 5 hours, but I wouldn't have rostered him before. And I wouldn't
just bringing up, so Matt Harvey last year had a 6.7 ERA, a 6.37 FIP. He was coming back from, I think it's called thoracic outlet surgery. So like you said, that we could look at him and we could say, well, Matt Harvey was a former top-of-the-line pitcher. Does that mean that he's going to be better this season? And I would say
better this season than last season isn't saying much for the record. He was
no. I agree with you. Anybody being better than a 6.
Definitely not arguing he's a good pitcher.
It's not that hard. But with that said, is he going to be back anywhere near what he was last year? He was throwing 94, 95 miles per hour last year. He's throwing 92 so far this year. So I don't really think he's progressed.
I just don't understand how you can. I'm not comparing him to Kershaw, remotely, of course, but. What's the difference? Can you explain to our viewers maybe what the difference, why you worry, other than the obvious that Kershaw is just, the best pitcher in baseball versus a guy like.
What does Kershaw have to do with this?
I was going to say, why do is his velocity still down? Because I know it was in the first couple starts of the year, and you weren't worried about that.
So, first off, I was worried about Kershaw's velocity. And I'm still a little worried about Kershaw's velocity. The difference is that there's such a difference between somebody from throwing 93 miles per hour to going 92 miles per hour versus somebody going from 97 miles per hour to 92 miles per hour. And also that Kershaw's actually pitched well regardless, whereas Harvey's just been awful. So
again, I don't think Harvey's a good pitcher. I'm not a Harvey fan. It was just, he's pretty cheap tonight. Milwaukee strikes out a lot, and I believe the Mets are home favorites. So, he's the favorite in a whole matchup with a team that strikes out a lot, and he's 6,800. So, okay. I do agree, though. There's probably like 4 or 5 better options, though, easily. So we can move on from Harvey.
All right. So the offenses you liked are Oakland and Seattle. What is the you like about those offenses, and which one is the preferred play for you?
That's a good question. Can you do me a favor? It's not loading for me right now. Real quick. Who's got a better WRC plus? Seattle against or Oakland against lefties, or Seattle against righties this year?
I don't know about the entire season. I'll bring it up, but the expectation is definitely for Seattle to be better against righties than Oakland is against lefties. Oakland was one of the worst offense in baseball against left-handed pitching last year.
Okay, sorry. Look, I'm not stacking them. I like them for plugs. For example, I like Semien to run it back. And I like the lefties on Seattle tonight. Obviously, Cano, the big bats, Kyle Seager. Gene Segura is having a great start to the year. He's not a lefty, but the guy just, gets on base.
All right. And then also, just because Matt brought it up in the chat really quick, we do have Nelson Cruz expected to be back in the lineup tonight, which he actually was activated the other day, and he wasn't in the lineup when he was first activated. And I think he tried to force his way into the lineup, and they just wouldn't let him play. So his first game coming back from injury, are you interested in rostering Nelson Cruz, or would you wait to see him play a couple of games first?
What do we know his price?
Yeah, I'll look.
Sorry, 4,500. Wow. Oh, I know Matt's not going to like this, but I do like Nelson Cruz's career numbers against Kendall Graveman. Nice 23, a big 23 at bats. He's hitting his whopping 609 with 2 home runs. So
I would assume
you guys are firm believers in sample sizes needing to be much bigger, which I do agree. And it's not really something you're leaving up to debate here. I know it's been very studied and scientifically proven that something that small isn't really that meaningful, but I would prefer a guy who's hitting 600 off of a pitcher and 25 career at bats than a guy who's, it's a small bump for me is my point. So the answer is, yeah, I will take Nelson Cruz tonight as long as he's playing, of course, but definitely he'll be in all my Seattle stacks.
Yeah, so for me, I would say that I think that Seattle has the highest expected run output of any team on the slate. So that's why I like them more than any other team. Kendall Graveman, 9.45 ERA, a 8.52 FIP so far this year. He was bad last year with a 4.18 ERA, a 4.33 FIP. He's fairly homer prone, 27.8% home run to fly ball rate so far this year. He doesn't strike anybody out. He gives up a lot of contact. This is a good Seattle offense. I think that they are the primary team to target. They're not all that expensive. Gene Segura, Nelson Cruz, Robinson Cano. I think you could pretty easily get all of these guys in with Rich Hill and Jameson Taillon. And to me, I think that is the way that I want to build most of my lineups tonight.
Oh, I thought you said your favorite combination was Hill and Richards.
What did I just say?
Hill and Taillon.
Oh, I meant to say Hill and Richards.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, Hill and Richards with Seattle stacks, those top of the lineup guys. I think that is the best way to go about building lineups tonight. I also think that Seattle is going to be fairly high owned because I think that they're a pretty obvious play. So
they're choppy. Can you repeat that, please?
I said I think that Seattle is going to go fairly high owned because they're. I think that they're the obvious play on the slate. So I'm just going to ask you: is there any secondary option that you think will have lower ownership that you like on this slate?
All right, I'm not sure if that's just me, but hopefully our users understood your question. So our customers. I heard what you're saying. You're asking about secondary offenses. So let me just pull up my screen to see what's been announced yet. But I have some interest in. No, I don't really have any. I'm going to be fading the San Diego game. Philly Tampa's on the slate. I probably have a little bit of interest in the Angels because they're just on fire right now to start the year, and I don't have that much respect for Jake Junis. I think he's kind of been a bit fortunate so far to start the year. Kind of surprised with his second start. I think his first start was against the White Sox. But yeah, I have some interest tonight in especially the lefty. Cole Calhoun, he's still way too cheap. I think there's no way his price has gone up since yesterday too much for 3,200. And oh yeah, Trout's Trout. So I'll have some Angel stacks. Probably going to completely fade the Dodger Arizona offenses. No interest in the Padres game. Mets Milwaukee's interesting. I know you're not a big fan of Chase Anderson. Are you going to have any Mets stacks tonight?
I don't think full Mets stacks, but I definitely like Mets players as plugs to fit in with some of the Seattle players. The issue I have with full Mets stacks is that they're a little expensive. So like Cespedes, Conforto, I think are both good high upside plays. I'd slightly prefer Conforto in that spot going up against a righty. Jay Bruce is at 4,000. Asdrubal Cabrera is hitting second at 3,400, so I think that he's a pretty sensible plug. The issue with just the full stacks of them is the pricing. I think that the team that does make a little bit more sense actually, I wouldn't say more sense as a stack, but also as plugs. I like both sides of that game for plugs. I like the Brewers players as plugs. I like the Mets players as plugs. I do not think that Matt Harvey's going to be good this year. Like I said, he is coming back from the surgery last year, and I would be more optimistic if his velocity was up this year. But since it's gone down even farther after a year of recovery, to me, I just don't see him bouncing back. I think he's going to be bad again this year. I
agree. I'm glad. I'm sorry. I regret even bringing him up. So just let the record show. There's no Harvey for me tonight.
So I think that both sides of that game make sense as plugs. Tristan wants to know, are Giants hitters still good for plugs, or is there better options? So the Giants tonight are playing in San Diego
against Clayton Richard.
So I think that the right-hand hitters for the Giants are viable options. I think that Evan Longoria is fine. I think that I think Andrew McCutchen's fine. Buster Posey as a catching option is certainly fine. It's really hard to get production out of the catcher spot. And Clayton Richard, I'll bring up his numbers against righties really quick. He's better against lefties than righties. He struggles against right-handed hitters. I wouldn't go full fine stacks, but I would certainly target the right-hand hitters in this matchup. How do you feel about it?
Are you going to run it? What do you like better, the righties for San Diego or the righties for San Francisco? Clayton Richards versus Derek Holland.
I think that Hunter Renfroe is a pretty good target. Who are some of the other? Matt has been hitting towards the top of the lineup. Overall, I prefer the righties from San Francisco just because they're better hitters. I would feel better about the Padres if Margot wasn't injured right now. Favorite plugs from San Diego. So from San Diego, it's Renfroe, Perella. Let me see if there's anybody else who I really like.
I like Chase Headley. He's hitting second.
Is he? Did the lineup come out?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry it didn't. I'm looking at a projection. I apologize.
Okay. All right. So we answered that question. Matt prefers the Padres side of the game. Yeah, I think it's sensible. I just think that the Giants offense is going to be much better than the Padres this year. And Derek Holland sucks. He's definitely worse than Clayton Richard. But to me, I think that the gap between the right-hand hitters from the Giants is greater than the gap. The gap from the Giants to Padres right-hand hitters is greater than the gap from Holland to Richards, how effective they are against righties. So who do you prefer, the righties from the Giants or the righties from the Padres?
I'm just looking at this Giants lineup. It astonishes me. This team 5-6 years ago, the people like Hunter Pence, Longoria, Posey, and McCutchen on one team would just be like insane. But I think if I had to choose one, I will probably go with the Padres side, truthfully.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Right. Derek Holland is
he's awful.
He's definitely been awful. Although actually he's been good so far this year, but it's a very small sample size. I think he's going to be terrible. He started the year with a 4.09 ERA, a 1.96 FIP. He's striking out almost 10 hitters per 9 innings, and his walk rate is way down.
Wow, he is getting a lot of Ks.
I do expect him to be worse this year. Zips is still projecting him for a 4.88 ERA this year. Steamer's projecting him for a 4.39 ERA. But to me, just the reason that I prefer the Giants side of the game, to reiterate, is just because I think that the Buster Posey, Evan Longoria, Andrew McCutchen, I still think that they're good hitters, and I think the Giants are going to have a decent offense this year, certainly better than the Padres. So let's move into some value plays. Are there any cheap guys that you like tonight?
Let me just lost my place. 1 second. Yeah, there's definitely cheap guys I like. There's always value. No, it's not always value, but there's more value in baseball than. 1 second, I'm pulling up my screen. I think Gene Segura is way too cheap, honestly. I know we both mentioned the Mariners. Everyone knows they're one of our favorite stacks tonight, but yeah, and I do usually prefer him against lefties, but I think Graveman's bad enough that we'll get away with it. And 3,500 for him, he should be mid 4K, and maybe even I think Segura is about $1,000 too cheap. Chase Headley, depending on where he ends up hitting, I think he'll still end up in the top 4, most likely top 5. So he's 2,900, obviously, which is way too. He's our righty bat against Holland, like we were just highlighting. Semien, absolutely, him against Gonzalez as well. It's a good guy to run it back with. We love him against left-handed left-handed arms. But value-wise, as Drubal's been, Derek Dietrich is leadoff still, I believe. So Derek Dietrich at 2,900 as well. There's a couple guys below 3K, sub 3K, who can really be game changers tonight. Derek Dietrich's one of them for me. Obviously, it's a horrible matchup against Tyon, but for a leadoff hitter, that's pretty cheap.
So the hitter is actually priced around the same as Derek Dietrich against Tyon that I could reasonably see myself rostering as Justin Bour at 3,000. So Bour is one of the better hitters in the National League, in my opinion. Let me bring up his numbers real quick as I'm talking. Bour also has a lot of home run upside. He could end up, let's see. Okay, so Bour had a 133 WRC plus last year. He hit 25 home runs in only 108 games. He has 3 homers through 13 games so far this year. He's somebody with 30 to 40 home run upside. So I think that he is playable at this price against any right-handed pitching just because he always has the ability to hit a home run. So I think that he's worth rostering for cheap. I agree with you on Semien. I think he's a good cheap play. Evan Longoria is really cheap. Even Buster Posey, I've talked about all these guys already, but Posey is, I think, the best catching option. He's relatively cheap. I don't really have too much else to add for cheap bats. Does anybody else have questions for Josh or I? Nothing in the chat. Do you have any final thoughts for the slate, Josh?
I'm looking. Look, we still need some lineups to come out, of course. I think we narrowed down the best pitching options, and I'm pretty happy with little Mariners stacks. With look, a lot depends on Nelson. Do we know if he's gonna do we expect him to play tonight, or is it just
yes, definitely.
Okay, so then yeah,
I mean,
I'll be mostly Mariners stacks tonight. I'll mix in the Brewers as well because you guys really sold me on how bad Harvey is. So he's got really flat stuff these days, and when you're not throwing a good slider and your fastball is just like the same mile per hour as it's doesn't usually bode well for a pitcher. And the Milwaukee offense, they hit big flies. Let's just say. Thames goes on these streaks, these home run streaks. Did the same thing last year. I think he could be starting one now too.
Okay, so that is going to finish today's show. You can follow me on Twitter at GArenbergDFS. You can follow the RotoPros account at RotoPros on Twitter. We also have a promo running right now for membership. Greg25, that's all GREG in capital letters. That matters. You get 25% off a monthly subscription. So you could check us out there, and we'll be back to do more of these shows in the future.